Hi, and welcome back to ConTinual. I'm your host, Jim Nettles, and tonight we're going to have a fangtastic conversation all about the modern take on vampires. So let's go around and see who is coming in to talk about some of our favorite bloodsuckers of the last few years. So, Ariel, you're up first.
Hi, I'm Ariel Dawn. I am a vampire fangirl at heart. I grew up with Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Anita Blake, Dracula, all the good stuff, Supernatural. And I actually have my own vampire series called Ava Crowley Vampire Slayer, and I'm best known for my monster romance series, The Monsters of Ashwood.
Ro?
Hi, I'm Ro. Pronouns are she, her. And yeah, my love of vampires probably started sneaking in to watch creature features with my dad on Friday nights when I was a wee lass back in the 70s. And I read Anne Rice way too early, which is, I mean, fine. I love that was how I was formed as a young person. Yes, have an absolute adoration for vampires. And as an author, I have written two series. One is a very wacky, paranormal, funny part of the Magic and Mayhem universe, and it's called The Miscreants. And then I also have a more serious kind of different take on vampires called the Sundowner series, which is gay vampires in Santa Cruz, some cult action. It's pretty creepy and yeah, and I can't wait to write more because it's wonderful. So thanks for having me.
Sumiko?
Yeah, my name is Sumiko Saulson. So I'm also an author. Most of my books aren't about vampires, but I did write a book called Warmth that was about really ghouls, but some of them are fronting and pretending to be vampires. And I've written a whole bunch of actually short stories about vampires, mostly African American, African diaspora vampire stories, like The Hills Blood Gold, which is in the Gold Rush era. And let's see, what else did I have? The one that's in Slade, Tales of the Vampire Noir, is about a African lightning bird, also known as Impundulu, which is a type of vampire. So yeah, and I think that and also poems, because I'm a poet. So yeah, that are about vampires. But also I love vampire stories. And like, my mom was watching Dark Shadows when she was pregnant with me. So pretty much when I was a little kid, she had me watching that on TV, and she loved vampires. So I was introduced to that kind of lore at a very early age. And then, was reading Anne Rice, then later L.A. Banks, Octavia Butler had the one story, Fledgling. So I've read a lot, but as far as like the TV shows and the movies, probably I've seen, like, if it was about vampires, me and my mom were gonna watch it. So I think that there are very few vampire movies and television series that I have not seen. I've pretty much seen them all.
Well, and when we look at vampires, right, they're one of our great classic monsters. And I mean, we can even often look at them as being the royalty of monsters. Often it's Prince Dracula, Prince Vlad, all the good stuff. But one of the things that we've seen is, historically, a vampire was a monster. There were those romantic elements. There were definitively a lot of what we would now kind of look at, that romanticy element with a lot of the characters. There was that enticement. There's a lot of, shall we call them, adult themes that go along with vampire lore. At the same time, though, it was still definitively a lot of horror, and a lot of it was very subtle. But if we look, I would say, at books, movies, TV shows, we've seen that vampire lore really kind of expand and be reimagined over the last number of years. You know, if we look at things like True Blood, you definitely still had those horror elements. You definitely still had a lot of bodies hitting the floor, but at the same time, your monsters weren't necessarily the vampires in those stories. Or, you know, if we look at some of the TV shows where maybe it takes a little bit lighter view, where it's much more of a, yeah, they're vampires, but that's really secondary to the story and the characters, and it's really more set dressing. Or we look at, you know, the young adult side of it with things like Twilight and maybe the way some of that's been reimagined. So if we look at kind of how this lore has been expanded and retold over the last few years, or last couple of decades, whichever comes first. You know, Ariel, what do you really think has a lot to do with how we view our modern vampires, say, versus, you know, our classic vampires?
I think the biggest difference from our modern vampires to our classic vampires is the way that we've shifted our views of monsters. You know, you have, you know, your originals, you have your Bela Lugosi's, you know, you have this more horrific, you know, depicted monster, right? And then as I feel like time has gone on, our view of monsters themselves has shifted to something more human because, you know, whether we're all human or not, we all have a monster inside of us in one way or another. So I feel like, you know, there's that mirror image, we've flipped it. And so now because we almost have flipped it and view the monsters as more human, obviously we want them to be more palatable and we want them to be hotter. We want them to be sexier. We want them to be more, you know, accessible to us. Whereas before it felt like, in a lot of, I think, contemporary historical vampire stuff, you had to be chosen. Whereas now it's not quite as much as you have to be chosen. It's more like either you're bound or you're, you know, colliding or you're fated, that sort of thing, where it's not as much about the choice that it was before to be, you know, to be found and lured. Now all of a sudden, you know, you're stuck together. So I think that's kind of shifted it too.
Ro, what about for you?
Well, I to echo what Ariel said, I definitely think that, you know, vampires have grown sexy over time, and I think a lot of that has to do with Anne Rice, and her take was kind of the first time. There was always kind of the lure of the Prince of Darkness and kind of like, you know, that threat to innocence that was part of it before, but once she kind of came into play and made them human monsters, I think that was a big deal. I think part of the reason why vampires and vampirism is still, you know, is still evergreen, is because you can do so much with the, you know, the lore. You can, it's such an allegory for so many things like immortality and purity. What I loved about True Blood, which I read the books before the show came out, and I mean it's an analogy for it's very queer coded. It's very much, you know, they are now out in the open and being treated like queer folks back in the 90s when the AIDS epidemic was running rampant, and, you know, queer people were being blamed for everything. And so I love that Charlene Harris used that as, you know, as a springboard. And there's a lot of good things to say about it. And then I think the show did a lot of great things separate from the books, even like that, you know, I loved that, you know, spoiler alert, I love that they didn't kill Lafayette off. I mean, he's probably one of the best characters on the show. And in the books, you know, he's gone very early. So I was happy that they kept him around, because he brought so much I think, gravity to a lot of the series. But yeah, I definitely think that we've used vampires to tell a lot of different stories, and they're just going to keep coming around. I think that there's an infinity in ad infinitum, opportunities, possibilities.
Sumiko, how about for you?
I think that sex and vampires actually go way back, in my opinion, because if you look at like the Mesopotamia and like the Sumerians and the Babylonians and like the Lilitu and Lamashtu, these were like demons that were spirits that returned from the dead, but they specifically, preyed on like pregnant women and things like that, and they did things like shape shifted, and honestly, like they would shape shift and change gender, which is kind of interesting from a queer point of view. But then this also was used to kind of cover up like infidelities, right? Like the reason the baby doesn't look like the husband is because the demon showed up and pretended to be, you know what I'm saying? Like just
always the demon.
Yeah, right, exactly. So these kind of mythologies were used to come up with excuses for why, different things, like we didn't have science. So going way back, this was connected with sex. And then, of course, like blood-borne and sexually transmitted like illnesses and stuff like that also are connected. So I do think that but also like when you look at like Camilla, the vampire, the vampire made me into a lesbian, right? So a lot of times
it's vampire's fault.
Yeah, exactly. I wasn't gay. The vampire made me to it. So I think that Victorian, like the whole Victorian era, vampires, they were all a bunch of sexy vampires. Like Dracula, also a sexy vampire. Like the vampire made Jonathan Harker cheat, and the vampire also made Mina cheat because they were compelled to by vampires. So it was always kind of a sexiness and and also a way to explain like things that people might catch through their infidelities. And I think that this is also part of why vampires with Anne Rice and with Charlene Harris, when you look at and also like The Hunger, that's another one that we didn't talk about, right? Mm-hmm. When you look at the time that these came out and how people were using the AIDS HIV pandemic as an excuse for homophobia and transphobia, the turning the vampires from monsters into heroes was because the vampires were often queer coded. And so as the society became more accepting towards queer people, that was a reason. I mean, look at like Clive Barker, literally like a big important gay horror writer. And, look at like Nightbreed, I love
Nightbreed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that this is part of how they became to be like more like human and more like the protagonist and less like the monsters. But I think that the sexiness was always there, just like going way back and like when the society was sexually repressed. Mm-hmm. The way that people were able to experience and talk about sex was, a vampire hypnotized me, and that's why I cared about sex, because otherwise I wouldn't,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and one other thing I wanted to say too about modern vampires is that in a way they're going back because they're doing something which is taking old myths and kind of like reimagining them, because when you look at Twilight and True Blood, both of them are actually using a lot of stuff about the Fae or fairies. Like the vampires in Twilight, the way that they sparkle, they shine. This is all stuff that you would see in fairy lore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's actually start a little bit more on the side of the romance, right? Because again, I think we've already started touching on this about the importance of the romantic elements, sex, drugs, and rock and roll with our vampires. That's something that goes along with the earliest days of what I would consider modern vampire lore, going back to Varney the Vampire and Dracula and the Victorian stories that went along with that British sense of repression, but all of the coding and stuff that went on and all of those romantic elements. How do you think that, and do you think that, we're seeing kind of a resurgence in some of that same sort of pulling the romance forward, but how do you think it's maybe different today with the stories we're telling? So, Ro, I'll start with you with, what do you think with the romantic side of our bloodsuckers?
Well, I think one of the things that makes it a romantic piece is, like, if you think about both True Blood and Twilight, you have a young woman that's kind of at the center who becomes sort of like this chosen one, or there's something so special about her that all of these monsters end up fighting around her and over her. Sookie in True Blood, has always, and like Bella, they both have always felt like an outcast and they don't really fit. And then here comes this person who understands them and can't hear their thoughts, which I found very interesting. And it appeals to that young adult. I mean, yes, True Blood, the books, the Sookie Stackhouse universe, those were written for an older, crowd than YA, but it still has that. It appeals to that vulnerability of, I'm different. I have been, scorned by people around me. I'm not lovable. And then here comes this, this creature who of everybody else, he chooses me. And I think is kind of, at the basis of a lot of romances, so I think they just kind of take it to the next level. And then of course with, the Vampire Diaries, which we kind of only just briefly mentioned so far, you still have a woman at the center who ends up having everybody fight over her, and she's vulnerable, and ends up being a damsel in distress a lot of the time. But there's something special about her that keeps all of these all-powerful creatures in thrall. You know what I mean? Which I think is interesting. I think it appeals to the piece of all of us that we want to be special. We want to be the one for someone. And if they happen to be, forever young and rich and powerful, then maybe that helps. I don't know. Just my 2 cents.
Sumiko, how about for you? What about the side of the romance of our modern vampire?
Okay, so first of all, I want to say that a lot of these like very traditional romance elements are coming straight out of fairy tales that were designed to tell young women that being chosen by a man who is, it's like a trad wife situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to get picked by a big, strong, handsome, wealthy dude. These go back to when there were like arranged marriages and stuff like that. So initially you're looking at this idea that like the reason that a lot of them are princes and this and that is to teach a value system that, of course, this is what you're looking for in a partner. But as we get more and more into the modern era and you have different types of people, I'm going to say that, first of all, Anne Rice definitely really made people think about vampires in a different way. And like when you start out with like, you look at like Dracula, right? The thing was she had to be saved from this vampire who was going to corrupt her, because then you've got a changing value, because now it's moving away from the kind of fairy tale of you want to be selected like in, you know, Sleeping Beauty or Cinderella, to you want her to be bonded with a common everyday man as an everyday woman. Therefore, you're teaching her that this prince is like really dangerous and she needs to now avoid him, to where then you're moving to your love triangle situations like you've got in Twilight, you've got in True Blood with Sookie Stackhouse, that she's going to date, she's going to be with. And of course, that's very much the case in Vampire Diaries. But in Vampire Diaries, they just keep, first of all, their brothers, so that's kind of messy right there. But also, like, she's really never gonna pick one. Like after a while, it just becomes very obvious that she's not gonna pick one. So, you know, you go all the way from that to like Laurel K. Hamilton with Anita Blake, Vampire Hunter. Like, this is just gonna be a big polycule, and they're gonna all be polyamorous. So, you know, there's a lot of different types of romances, and it doesn't always have to be super traditional, I think, especially when you go outside of things that are for kids. But I think that in the I think that in Vampire Diaries, even though it was for young people, it was just much spicier, honestly. And I think that in Twilight, another thing is that in the book, like, it was always obviously going to be Edward. Like, it wasn't really a thing where it seemed like Jacob was going to be able to be a valid love interest. But in the TV show, in the movies, they really did make that more of a thing. And he's just, he's just a regular guy at first. And then, of course, he becomes a werewolf. So, yeah.
Ariel?
I think when you break down romance in general, right, and we kind of touched on this, there's certain tropes and there's certain things that kind of lend itself to all of the romance genres, right? But when you're looking at vampire romance specifically, or, the paranormal romance, urban fantasy realm, I feel like you kind of get separated into two camps. And those camps are, we need to humanize the villain, or, we need to become the villain type thing, right? And so sometimes I think that's kind of where you get a lot of your enemies to lovers stuff. I can even go as far back as to say even like, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, where you had, Spike was essentially the villain, and, eventually by, the end of the show, that was a little different. So I think some of that with the romantasy aspect, or the romance aspect of, our bloodsuckers, so to speak, they can kind of be metaphorical and allegorical on their own, but there's also this draw that kind of goes back and forth with that chosen one, with that, I'm different, and specifically in a lot of those books, especially Twilight is a really good example. One of the things that I know a lot of people have issues with is how Bella is written. She's written that you can insert yourself into that point of view so that, you can feel chosen, that you can, have this fantasy, this escapist thing there. And at the crux of romance, I feel like that's what it is. It's an escape, right? So I feel like you're either in we need to humanize the villain, and fall in love with the villain and realize that they're not really a monster, or we're on the other side of it where, the human is now the monster.
Well, what about the other side of this, right? The one where I would say we've largely changed maybe from the horrific elements, is it the same level of horror that we had before? I mean, What about the horror side of it, Sumiko? I'll start with you on this one. So when we look at our modern vampire stories, yes, we still have necessarily some of the violence. We still have some of the bodies hitting the floor. But at the same time, how do we look at vampires from that horrific standpoint today versus the way we have in the past?
Okay, well, I think first of all, you're going to have to talk about horror and what it is as a genre and the genre tropes. Because, I mean, honestly, Final Girl is one kind of genre trope that you see in these. And then I think another kind of genre trope is that really in a horror story, whether you have a Final Girl or not, there's people that are kind of the centered characters. Okay, in romance, there's one kind of thing that has to happen to make it a romance is one, the couple has to get together, and two, like, honestly, you just can't really kind of just randomly kill off the couple that's supposed to get together in the end. Like, you can't just dispense with them. And like, honestly, as someone who writes like horror erotica, one of the things that makes things that I write not get necessarily categorized as horror romance is because I don't really like, I feel like it's horror. So anyone can die. Anyone being able to die is part of actually horror as a genre, right? Yeah. In romance, only certain people are allowed to die. So since only certain people can die in a romantic story, you now have certain characters that can only be put in so much jeopardy because these are the people that are going to get together and be the couple at the end, right? Now, if one of them dies, then it's not really a romance. It's actually a tragedy. Romeo and Juliet, that's a tragedy. Okay, it's a romantic tragedy, which is a different genre entirely. So the more you get into something that's purely, a lot of this has, like, as writers, this has to do with like how you're marketing stuff, right? If you want something to be able to be marketed as a romance, then they have to either be able to live happily ever after, or they have to be able to live happy for now, happily ever after for now, which means that the people around them can be put in danger in a way that they cannot. So I feel like that whether that is happening or not depends on what kind of romance you're dealing with. If you're dealing, it depends on how much you're leaning into the romance and how much you're leaning into the horror. And then there's another genre that we should talk about, which is a genre called supernatural, right? And a lot of people are fans of this genre called supernatural, which is more of like a dark fantasy type of genre where you don't use necessarily horror tropes, but you have things in it like vampires and werewolves and stuff like that, right? And the TV show Supernatural it is a horror show, but it is actually also in the genre called supernatural. So instead of there being like a romantic couple, you've got these two brothers, and we kind of know if one of them dies, they're just going to get brought back to life during the run of the show. Because how's the show going to exist without the run, right? So I feel like that's part of what is making it seem less scary. But I think that if you really think about what's actually happening, things are happening that are really scary. They're just not really being portrayed in a way that they're portrayed in horror, right? Like, a lot of things happen in Twilight that are objectively actually, like, if you chose to write it as pure horror, you could do that without actually changing the nature of the characters by just kind of switching the focus, okay? Because every single one of those vampires, that's in that story has killed people. And sometimes they have accidents and they slip up and they kill people, right? For example.
Mm-hmm.
So, in like, you know what I'm saying? Scary things happen, but they're portrayed in ways that are not scary.
Mm-hmm.
And like
minimized. Yeah,
they're minimized.
Yeah.
They're minimized. I mean, honestly, a dude that's like 100 some years old, going to high school and trying to date a high school student, like that's not really romantic. And like the thing that makes that different, like how is that really different than like, what is it, Labyrinth? Like how is he different than Gareth in Labyrinth? You know, actually kind of similar. You know what I'm saying? So I think that it depends on how you want to view it. Like the lens, the literary lens that you choose to look at these things through determines whether they're terrifying or like, you know, we're going to go with a version of reality where you're so focused on the romance that you don't care that, you know, this literally is the skin of a killer. This dude murders people. This dude thinks you smell like a snack. Like not in a sexy way, but he actually wants to eat you. Yeah, that's scary. Yeah.
No, I think that's definitely the point. And one of the things I find interesting in the romance genre, and this is even beyond vampires, is that monstrous behavior has become so much more desired. In romance, dark romance, people doing very bad things. It used to be that they had to be some sort of a monster or had some sort of affliction and they can't help it. They have to kill to survive or la 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 la. Well, we've kind of moved beyond that to the point where no, you can just be a serial killer and that's still sexy. Like, so I find that interesting because I think there's also the piece that makes it romanticized, that is love will redeem the monster. You know, if someone loves them enough, and it goes back to the fairy tale thing, obviously. And I think that's what you have with all of the things that we've talked about. But yeah, I think we've moved beyond loving monsters because it's a little bit dangerous and they can get away with doing bad things. And now a lot of the books that are super popular, wow, some of the stuff in those books is, which, you know, as a horror fan, I'm looking at those going, wow, that's what they find sexy now? Okay. Am I getting old? Am I getting to my get off my lawn moment? I don't know.
This is one of my favorite things to talk about, actually, so I'm so glad you brought this up. This is like I always say, this is my dissertation. You know, so I think a lot of that, too, what you're bringing up, too, about this whole idea of monstrous behavior, right, being attributed to just a monster, and now it's not necessarily attributed to a monster. It's either a human or a monster who appears human or is more human than, you know, that sort of thing. I think a lot of that comes back to, in society, just in general, I feel like it's a reflection of ourselves that, you know, with the type of behavior and the type of relationships that we see in romance, in books, especially in dark romance, and especially with some of those monstrous characters, you know, the serial killers, or, you know, the monsters who are over there like shredding bodies in the corner, and then like 5 seconds later you see them and their blood all over their face and you're like, swoon. You know, that, you know, there's a sense of it there where the idea of being monstrous is equated to either being dominant or being, you know, personable, or being able to pass as human, but really housing something darker inside. And I think that itself is a definite reflection, and it gets attributed more towards the monster romance realm, especially with vampires, because we have that long-standing connection to seeing vampires as this like otherworldly thing, like we said, like Dracula, or, you know, the Prince of Darkness type thing. But I think another part of that that comes into play there with it is also how the vampires are structured. Like typically in the past, you had it where it was like, okay, the only way you can be turned into a vampire is by if you're bitten by another vampire, and then like you're sired or you're chosen or whatever. But modern day vampires, there's so many different iterations of how you can become a vampire, of how you can be the monster. So I think that plays into it too. So
Well, and since we're talking about reflections or maybe a lack thereof, one of the things I think that we've also seen is a lot of that traditional vampire lore, the things that come out about, can you walk in sunlight or not? We've got the notion of the daywalkers now, or sparkling. If we look at some of these other ideas, I want to hit on immortality and the importance of immortality with most vampire lore, and maybe how we even might look at that a little differently today than we even did, even maybe 20, 25 years ago. So Ariel, kind of how do you look at the modern vampire and how we explore this idea of immortality these days?
I think it comes back to, and then we talked about this in our previous panel a little bit too, about the whole life versus death thing. In its entirety, I feel like sometimes the idea that a vampire can live forever has not changed. That's remained constant throughout all the legends, the stories, the literature, what have you. But I think what's really changed is how we view that immortality, or how we think a vampire would, react to that. Specifically, one of the things that I deal with in my Ava series is I have a lot of I have these vampires and other types of monsters. It's part of my Forevermore world, which is a gigantic, like my own little Marvel verse over there. And one of the things that I deal with a lot there is this whole, that they are immortal, but what does immortality do to a person if they're essentially still human? Like, because when you break it down, a vampire is, yes, they're a monster, but at the base, they are still somewhat human, or they were human once. So I feel like a lot of that has to do with how we view immortality and how we view, life versus death, more than it has to do with the monsters themselves. And that is one of the things that I try to touch on a lot, is the difference. Like I have several vampires that are all kind of like in their own, from their own little world or whatever, the high covens type thing, but not all of them stayed there, or, they've gone through life, either this one's left, kind of like we said earlier about some of the, the more horrifying aspects. So when you have that distinct thread of immortality from beginning to end, I think the only thing that's really changed is how we are viewing it as, how would we feel if we could live forever, if that makes sense.
So, Ro, how do you view immortality with the whole notion of the moment you become a vampire, you become hot, sexy, and you live that way forever?
I find that interesting. As a historian, I think that humanity, and no offense, Jim, but the colonizer mindset of our white for people who wanted their names everywhere and wanted to conquer everything. And I think that some of that is wrapped up in, why vampires appeal to some people, is because they want to live on forever and have a legacy, right? Which is kind of weird, but it's a thing. I think the other thing that's weird about it is we will do a lot of things as human beings to protect ourselves from being hurt. And so I think one of the things that happens a lot in vampire stories is, well, I have to change this person because I can't survive if I lose them. And their fragility as a human is what makes them attractive. But then in order to keep them, you have to change them so that they will be with you forever. So then, like, how does that impact what attracted you to them in the first place? That is really, a mind, to swear. It's a little mind fucky, I think, when it comes to immortality. I had a lot of fun playing with this in my Sundowner series because I took a different spin on it, where my vampires originated from an ancient druid who learned how to heal people with their minds. And part of their process of doing that had to do with an exchange of blood as a way to survive. And so in part of the series, there's the love interest is a grad student who's studying cult behavior. And he goes on this whole tangent about the uses human beings have done with blood throughout history, and how it makes you stronger. It can cure things. Like there's in the time of the gladiators, where people would rush into the ring after a gladiator was slaughtered so that they could drink the gladiator's fresh blood because they believed they would take in some of that strength and essence. And I mean, we're weird friggin' creatures. I mean, I did all this research, and like they used to make jelly out of blood and eat it and then if you think about it, back in time when women used to use, the blood of innocents to preserve their skin. I mean, come on, we are weird creatures, and we will do just about anything to stay young and beautiful and be important in our own minds or whatever. So I think, as much as I love vampires, there's a part of it that I'm like, ew, this is just a reflection of some of the grossest part of humanity.
Sumiko, how about for you, that notion of immortality?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think that it has a lot to do with the fact that we actually do die and that we are mortals. And then when people die, well, we have a lot of belief systems about what happens after we die, but these people don't contact us and they don't talk to us anymore. So when you look at a lot of the lore, well, a lot of what you're dealing with is honestly, vampires are dead. Okay, they're called the living dead for a reason, which is that they've actually undergone the practice or undergone dying. And now that they're dead, in most lore, they're not really allowed to have contact with human beings or engage with human beings. So part of their desire to turn other people so that they can have companions is because humans have now become their prey. So they cannot really engage with them outside of as prey, but then they come from them initially. So, these are ghosts made flesh, so to speak. And I think that in my own writing, I deal with immortality a lot in the Metamorphoses of Flynn Keahy, which is my book series that starts with Happiness and Other Diseases, which I would say is horror erotica, because if I call it horror romance, then people are going to notice that a lot of it is really based in the Greek and Roman mythologies, which are often tragic. So a lot of it is based on things like Psyche and Eros, and also Orpheus. With Orpheus, he goes to rescue his wife from the land of the dead, which means he has to enter and walk through the land of the dead, right? This desire to love beyond death, and the idea that love can outlast death. It's not just in vampire stories. It's also like in The Crow. That's another one like that. I would say, I would say that maybe Happiness and Other Diseases, it's a little more like The Crow in that it's got a lot of tragedy in it, which means it's not following romance tropes, but the romance is there. And then in order for them to be together requires immortality, and immortality requires death, and death requires not being involved with the people that you came from, or the people that you originated with. And some of it really is kind of insidious, because like when you look at it, okay, most people that become vampires when they're fairly young. Like, you don't have like a whole bunch of people. There are exceptions, like in Anne Rice's lore, Akasha, Queen of the Damned, she has a son, and her son is named Seth. And both of his parents were vampires, but they didn't really want to force him to become a vampire, so he became a very old man before he became a vampire. So he's an older dude that's a vampire. But for the most part, people just want to preserve the youth of the person that they're turning into a vampire, which means that these people are now cut off from their family of origins. And this becomes like a whole problem. And I think that one thing that, came up in with that in the Anne Rice vampire stories that you now see coming up, and I don't want to spoiler it, but this is actually here in the vampire Lestat, which is that, of course, Lestat turned his mother, Gabrielle, into a vampire so that they could be together. And then them being together got kind of weird, it got a little weird. Yeah. So I think that, again, I feel like a lot of this is rooted in that, in like, I want to say religions, when people live forever after dying, then their ties to the mortal world are cut off. And I think that this is kind of like duplicating how your mortal ties get cut off. But it's just in a form where the ghosts have bodies and are walking around and we're food. Well, and also we do eat animals and drink their blood. Just stating the obvious, but this is part of it too.
Well, and one of the other things too that I've seen a shift in the lore and this notion of immortality and everything else as well. I thought I locked that camera so it wasn't going to zoom in on me, but okay. So
Jim's getting serious now.
We're getting serious. You don't have to stay this close to me. Okay. Anyway, so but one of the things that is really interesting to me is about how we used to see a lot of things in movies and fiction where it was that notion of the century-old vampire finally was no longer a child. And part of that was because at that point, everyone from your mortal life, was now past and gone. Mm-hmm. When we look at it, maybe some of the new things, and I'm thinking, specifically here about things like True Blood, where, I'm a vampire, but everybody gets to know. So you get to have that ongoing human relationship, even though you're no longer human. So when we look again, I would say that there's a lot more of, to tie together a lot of the things we've talked about, that notion that we want a deeper connection with our monsters, because to Ariel's point, we know that all humans make the best monsters. Mm-hmm. And when we look at vampire lore, there's that notion of eternity and beauty and power and strength that we as mere mortal humans don't have. So, and Ro, I'll throw this question to you first. So out of kind of like all the kind of modern series, whether it's TV, movies, even book series, whatever else, what is a favorite that speaks to you, and what is it about that that may be different from historically what we would see with vampire lore?
What are my favorites?
What's the favorite?
Oh God. Wow. I get this one first.
Nobody ever said I played fair.
I like right. Ariel and I talked about this before we started recording, just that Twilight brought people back to reading. some of us who hadn't read for a long time because we had young kids and we were teachers, and who reads? Who has time to read for pleasure? And my students all kind of came in with this book with the apple, and I was like, what is this book with the apple? What is this? And and then I read it, but then I immediately was like, okay, where's the grown-up piece? Where's the grown-up version of this? Because I need it. I mean, obviously, like, I had read Anne Rice starting when I was like 14 years old, so I had read those books, but then I got sick, and I was sick for I was on disability for about 6 weeks, pneumonia. It was Teaching is so great for your body. And my husband had just gotten his Kindle and was like, here, you can just click and a book will appear. And I was like, wow, imagine that. And I read the entire, I had started reading the True Blood books, but then I finished that series. I read J.R. Ward's Black Dagger Brotherhood, which takes a whole other piece of it in that they're another species. And they are not immortal. They just live for a long time, which I loved those. I read Sherilyn Kenyon's Dark Hunters, which was this whole take on Greek mythology. Like Sumiko mentioned, like we've brought a lot of pieces in, and I think I just fell in love with the fact that even though vampires, there's so many stories, like there's always something different that people can do with it. And a lot of my favorite series that I reread are vampire adjacent. I do. I really do. Like, we talked a little bit about, the Vampire Diaries TV show. I loved the show up till about the 4th season, and then I just kind of, life happened and I didn't keep up with it. But I think I said to myself that I was not going to write vampires unless I had something different to say. And so when I finally did, I was like, okay, I feel like I have something different here. I'm a huge fan of What We Do in the Shadows. Like, we didn't talk about that yet. Like, how awesome is a reality show about vampires living in modern day? It was Staten Island. Isn't that where they're supposed to be on the TV show? I mean, obviously the movie was phenomenal, but the TV show is so fun. And so, they're like my friends, I like to hang out with them and be creepy. So we can blame, Anne Rice, and can blame Creature Features for my, young, twisted mind. Fright Night was one of my absolute favorite. The Lost Boys came out while I was in high school, and I spent tons of time in Santa Cruz. And so being able to go and see where all of the, places were filmed was just, so I guess it's just kind of followed me forever and forever.
Sumiko, how about for you? What's some of the favorites for you, and what's the influence for you there, or what is it different about that modern vampire that appeals to you?
Yeah, well, I want to say that, like, one thing I want to say is that the movie Buffy the Vampire Slayer just has a special place in my heart, honestly.
Yes.
Like, yeah, that like, just as a member of Generation X, that was just really, like, yeah,
the best death scene ever.
Yeah, and her crush on Christian Slater, everything, and also the fact that she could tell vampires were coming near because she got cramps on her period. Yes. Like, there was so much in there that was not actually in the TV show, that I'm really specifically talking about that movie. That was a great movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, yeah, and Pee-wee Herman.
Yes,
also,
Paul Rubens.
Yeah. So, also, I think that the originals I really love that particular TV show. And it's mostly because of Marcel, although they have a lot of great people of color in that show. I think that as a vampire who's Black, he has a lot more personal agency. Like, I'm going to say this, it looks like, and this isn't really a spoiler, it looks like by the time we get to Vampire Lestat that, Louis as a Black vampire is starting to have some personal agency. But, like, for the the entire interview, just the fact that of them having to live in historically accurate times makes so much actually trauma for me as an African American watching the AMC versions of Claudia and Louis. Like, it's just very hard to watch sometimes. With with Marcel, you've got someone who's already, that stuff's in the past for him. He is living his best life with his personal agency. He is pissed off, and he is definitely there to fight back. And I just love, and also, he's hot, really, really hot. Louis hot too.
And I haven't watched it yet, so that makes me want to watch it even more now.
Yeah. I like that about it. And I also liked the fact that they really did not shy away from the fact that his father, his maker, I should remember the student's name, the vampire wolf hybrid dude, they didn't shy away from the fact that this dude was actually a jerk. Like, he was an asshole.
Is it Klaus?
Yeah. Klaus, they did not, he got to be sexy, he got to be a love interest, but there was just no, there was no backing away from that. He was super toxic. Like, they're like, y'all like this dude. This dude is very much toxic. They were not trying to pretend anything like that about it. I think that Tara is another one that I feel like there was a lot of trauma that she had to endure in True Blood that was really hard for me to watch, which made it so that even though I really like the show, that I really kind of like Marcel was better for me. He just had a lot of personal agency.
They put Tara, Tara was so different than in the books, and I was like, yay, but then they just destroyed her. They put her through so many horrible things in that show.
It was unnecessary. It was just like over the top, trauma porn going on there.
Yes.
And as someone who writes stuff like that, I'm like, sometimes I'm like, okay, did I go too far with this? But sometimes the more fun stuff is just fun to watch. And so I really loved I really love the originals as a kind of more lighter fare type of situation. Real
quick, can I ask, Sumiko, did you have a similar feeling of the difficulty watching Sinners? Was that hard for you to watch, or?
No, not really. Because even though there was a lot of death in there was also a lot of just really vengeance that felt like it made sense. I think that it was a little hard for me to watch. I think the character's name is Mary, the woman that was I think she was only an eighth black. Because from a historical point of view, passing into whiteness is a subject that there was been a lot of conversation about in my family, because my grandmother was as light as me, and my grandfather was a really a darker skinned black fellow, and my grandmother's sister Victoria was an actress, and she actually passed for white in order to act on television, and then she would come back home and live her whole in Hollywood, because I'm born in LA. She would come back home and then just live her life as a black woman. Passing into whiteness was something that was done very intentionally. And once it was done, returning back to the community would put the community in danger, which is their really point about her. And, they're making points about how her proximity to whiteness created danger for the community. And once she left, she really didn't need to come back. So, there was a lot of deep thought stuff that had to happen. But I think that the trauma was from the actual KKK more than the vampires. The vampire, Remick was like somebody that's trying to get you in like a predatory like contract, and like music, try to get musicians into a predatory contract.
Yeah.
And like, you know, like he's like just really trying to sell vampirism to people and seduce people into vampirism, because he's after Sammy's like talent as like, you know, a griot, as someone who's got this historical connection to his people. So you know, the vampires used lies and seduction, and they're, you know, despite the fact that the vampires were scary and creepy, when it came to like the real life, like horrible, evil, like KKK people, like, you know, I guess it's not much of a spoiler, but they all got their comeuppance. None, you know what I'm saying? None of them were going to get away with anything. They were just going to die. Like no one was trying to, you know, turn the KKK into a vampire army in this movie. You know, there was a very clear like even though the vampires interested in joining up with these, you know, human monster people.
Right.
Yeah, that made it a little easier to really deal with. I think that like in the book Interview, it's very clear that Anne Rice is saying slavery is bad and the Confederacy is bad. But I think that because she has vampires that are slave owners and vampires that are like Confederates, that this just ended up kind of coming down through like into modern vampirism as like something that turned into in certain other books that I won't name, and certain other like like several YA things, not just one. I mean, almost every other one that we talked about, honestly. I guess since it's all of them, I could just say that in the TV show of True Blood, in the TV show of the Vampire Diaries, and in Twilight, and all those to make these like people that have messy pasts as bigots kind of like socially acceptable or like okay. And like in the movie, in the Interview TV show, they just made it so that they like he's black, and they just got away from the whole Louis is a slave owner storyline. But in the book, it just really shows how he's a slave owner and how he has humans that are being treated in a subhuman way. And that when he has to deal with Lestat, who's a cold-blooded killer, it just forces him to have to deal with that what he's doing is actually not humane. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like he has deceived himself up into that point of thinking that he is somehow treating his slaves humanely, and then his boyfriend thinks that those are a snack. And, you know, so, I mean, I feel like, you know, even when people are trying to convey a message that this is bad, it could really be still kind of mistaken. So I think those are kind of, even though those are hard to look at, it's probably important to have these conversations.
Absolutely.
And I'm really glad, it really, that they exist. But I'm also glad that they have Black folks like L.A. Banks and, you know, Octavia Butler, that had, of course, you know, I'm Enslaved, Tales of the Vampire Noir. You know, I'm glad that those are out there also in the world. And you know,
And that one's from Mocha Memoirs, which, you know, that's always a good imprint.
And we didn't mention Blade. Yeah, because Blade Blade is half vampire and a vampire hunter. So yeah.
Oh
yeah. So Ariel, how about for you? What's something you want to bring up here in terms of the favorites of the modern?
In terms of the favorites, one of the things that I love about modern vampire lore, is the walking in the sunlight. I love that we finally gave up with that. And then the other one, I don't know if anybody still uses, that vampires are like against garlic, but I'm glad we kind of gave that up. I think I even have that they have to be invited in. I actually talk about a couple of those things in my Ava books. I think there's like one where like he's in front of the door or something like that, and he's trying to not come inside or whatever, but and she says something, and she goes, "I thought you couldn't come inside unless I invited you," or whatever, and he was like, "Yeah, because it's rude." Like, like, of course I can. It's just rude. Do you go into people's houses and things like that. So I'm glad we've kind of left some of those more campy type, tropes in the past. Specifically, one of the things that I like, and I want to say I feel like it's Colleen Gleason, I think is the author. She has a series, I think it's called the Gardella Vampire Chronicles. And we have some of those types of tropes that we've left behind. So we've got, they're Victorian vampires at the time though. But we've got a little bit more of that, kind of going into more of being more like a human, just not existing like a human. And I think one of the other things that I find really interesting, and I don't see a lot of it yet, I hope that changes, but the difference of aging. Specifically, one of the things that I notice a lot of people have complained about throughout the years, and whenever I first wrote In the Blood, I had asked about 1,000 people, what do you love about vampire novels? What do you hate about them? Mm-hmm. And a lot of people came back with, it's always some old guy, right? And some young girl type thing, mm-hmm. which it is. And so when I wrote my vampires, I thought, how do I kind of break away from that, right? And I've seen some other authors do this too, in the past couple years, because I do still read a lot of vampire romance. But like, moving away from being an immortal old man. And like my vampires are in a sense frozen at the age that they are turned, but they're still able to, some of them are able to have kids, some of them are not, type thing. And so you have kind of like a very fun play on, if you're frozen at a particular age, are you going to act like a 17-year-old for 100 years? Or are you going to, gravitate and build some knowledge over those 17 years, but through the scope of a 17-year-old? To kind of, and I've seen some other books do that as well. So I kind of like that we've left that, trope behind as well, and are still in the process of reinventing that one. But I like to see more of that, and I hope to see more of that.
Well, I think we've had a fun deep dive into our modern bloodsuckers. Mm-hmm. But before we get out of here, let's make sure that everybody knows where to find you guys. Website, social media, of course, what they need to be stacking on that to be read pile. So, Ariel, you're up first.
You can find me at www.ariel-dawn.com. I'm on all the platforms, everywhere you can find me. If you are interested in checking out my Forevermore series, it is a 3-series world. So you have the Forevermore books, which are the more historical romance, and they deal with all of the past stuff. Then you have the Ava Crowley Vampire Slayer series, which is the main series, and the Hunter Games, which is her brother. So that's the big, gigantic Ariel Dawn vampire world.
Ro?
You can find me at rlmerrillauthor.com and RL Merrill author on the socials. If you want to try some wacky, fun goodness about a band who accidentally gets turned into vampires, the Miscreant series, I think the first book is called Fang Me 3 Times. Or if you like the little bit more serious, the little bit more lore, then definitely Sundowners. The Miscreants is 3 books, and Sundowners is at 2 right now, but there will be more. And it's definitely more of a supernatural suspense. I did get a little bit of a little flack because I thought I had done a perfectly adequate happily for now at the end of the first book, and there were several reviews that were like, "That's a cliffhanger." I was like, "Wow, okay." So there are 2 books, and there's definitely a happily for now at the end of book 2, but it's not finished yet. So, yeah.
Sumiko?
Yeah, so you can find me on my website, sumikosaulson.com. I am Sumiko Saulson, just one word, on Instagram and Discord, and Sumiko SKA at all the other places, Facebook, TikTok, that one that people don't use that much anymore that used to have a bird, and stuff like that. And I don't use it that much, but it exists. And my publisher for my most recent books is Mocha Memoirs Press. So that's mochamemoirspress.com, which is where you can find the book that I mentioned earlier, Happiness and Other Diseases, and its sequel, Somnalia. And it's got a 3rd book coming out, which is called Insatiable. So that, will be coming out in the near future. So obviously you want to get the other ones and read them, catch up. And my most recent book of poetry, Dance of Necromance, Poetry Book of the Dead.
Awesome.
And you can
and Sumiko is the guest of honor at BayCon in Santa Clara in just a couple weeks.
Right. Yeah, that's going to be 4th of July weekend. So if you happen to be seeing this before 4th of July weekend, 2026, I am the poet laureate for BayCon, which is at the Santa Clara Marriott.
Excellent. And you can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentialsworkshops.com, creatingprose.com, and of course here at ConTinual. And thanks everybody for hanging out with us. Beware those guys that sparkle or look just a little too good. You never know.
I'll have my after dinner drink, my O positive True Blood. This stuff tastes like liquid Smarties.
Oh,
It does. I'm not drinking this one because it's really old, but yeah.
Oh,
mine is signed.
Yay!